everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and iOS 15 brings with it a lot of different changes that I've covered in past videos, and there's hundreds and hundreds of them. However, I wanted to help you save battery and maybe give you a few charging tips that actually work since they're directly from Apple. There's a lot of other information out there, and every year I try to look past that, look exactly at what Apple's saying, and then give those tips to you so you can best utilize your phone and make it work best for you. And so the first thing is, with the latest phones, the iPhone 13 Pro and the iPhone 13 Pro Max, they both have ProMotion. Apple's ProMotion is a technology that ramps up and down the actual display refresh rate and then actually gives you a smoother experience. Now, this is a really nice feature, but it does use a little additional power. Apple brings that up and down to try and save power, but if you want to save even more, you can turn that off. So you go to Settings, and then under Settings, go to Accessibility. Under Accessibility, go to Motion, and under Motion, turn on Limit Frame Rate. You'll see that it says sets the maximum frame rate of the display to 60 frames per second. Personally, I like this turned off, and you can actually turn it on to save power or turn it off to use the feature. I like to leave it off, but wanted to show you the example of what it's like. Now, you can't see it in this video since it's actually at 30 frames per second. You won't see the different 120 hertz refresh rate, but it is something that's very nice and should be managed pretty well by Apple. But if you do want to turn it off, you can. And while we won't turn on low power mode just yet, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Low power mode will also disable ProMotion. So Apple's disabling it for you if you turn that on. Now, the next thing is we want to see what's actually using our battery. And to do that, we go into Settings, and we'll go back to the main screen and then go to Battery. Under Battery, we have a few different things here. We have low power mode, we have battery health, and of course we have a different monitor of our battery overall. Battery health is simply just the measure of the overall health capacity of the battery. Every battery starts at 100, and over time, as it's charged up and brought back down, it will actually degrade over time. This is just true of current batteries, and until someone invents a better battery, this will be true. So hopefully someone invents one at some point, but I recommend turning on optimized battery charging, because what this will do is bring it up to 80%. Say you charge it every night. That's what I do. Put it on the charger. It brings it up to 80% and holds it there until it knows you normally get up. So if you have an alarm set, for example, it will actually make sure it's charged by the time that alarm's set to go off. So maybe you set your alarm for 8 a.m. It will bring that charge up to 100% before 8 a.m. since you don't want to really keep it at 100% all the time, according to many battery experts. However, I've found that keeping it at 100 doesn't seem to affect an iPhone overall too much, but maybe might affect it by about 3% of your capacity per year. That seems to be about average. But if you want to keep the best health, I would recommend turning that on. Now, another part of charging your phone is making sure that it doesn't get too hot. Now, iPhone generally regulates this by itself, and if you have a case on it that seals the whole phone, that can make it get really warm, and I generally recommend taking that off if you're fast charging. However, another way to help regulate that temperature is to use a charger that has technology built in, like the Anker Nano Pro. Anker is the official charging partner of Zollotech, and they've sponsored this video, and this is a charger that I use all the time. I highly recommend it, and it's the Anker Nano Pro that has Power IQ 3.0, and it works flawlessly with any iPhone. It has a super compact design. You'll see it's 45% the size of a regular charger, but it charges at 20 watts and 50% in about 25 to 30 minutes, depending on the device. Anker Nano Pro also uses Anker's patented Active Shield to monitor temperature and adjust current to make sure that the phone doesn't get too hot. Again, crucial to keeping your battery health in good condition. It comes in 4 different colors: Glacier Blue, Cool Lavender, Arctic White, and Black Ice that I'm holding here. I'll leave a link to them in the description below. Now, the graph that Apple provides shows when the phone was charged. You'll see it was charged quite a bit today in my car. And if you look at the last 3 days, it just gives you your general usage. However, on some of these days, maybe we're getting poor battery life, it will show you exactly what's using your battery. So you go to Show Activity, and it shows whether or not it's just being used or being used in the background. And so if it's being used in the background, you may want to disable background app refresh. And I disable that on almost everything. If you go into your settings and then you go to General, under General is Background App Refresh. Background App Refresh checks in the background for apps you use most often and tries to refresh them based on what it thinks you want to see. However, if you're not using some of these apps regularly, I generally recommend turning them off. Lately, I've been turning this off altogether. However, you can change it from Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi and cellular. It really just depends, but you will need to go through them individually one by one. There's no way to turn them all off at once and then individually go back and turn them on easily anyway. So 1Password, you go into it, you can't go into it until it's on a different setting, and then you can turn it on or off. So generally I just turn it off and leave it like that. You don't have to do that, but you will get some battery saving according to Apple. Another thing that typically uses a lot of power is your lock screen. If we go back into this battery graph here, you'll see it says home and lock screen used 9% of my battery. Now, using 9% of my battery, that means it's lighting up the display to show me a notification. So in order to turn that off, you go to your notifications under settings. And under notifications, you can go into each one individually. You could turn them off altogether or go into each one individually. Maybe we'll go to Find My. Maybe I want to have that pop up on my screen, such as my lock screen here, or notification center, or a banner. You can customize this individually, and if you have it on lock screen, it will light up the screen unless you're in a do not disturb mode and you've told it not to. So generally, I recommend turning that off if it's something that's using a lot of your power. So you can do that or turn off notifications altogether, of course, but then you won't get things that are important to you. So I recommend customizing these one by one. Of course, it will take a lot longer if you have a lot of apps, but it's something that will help. Another thing that's a common misconception is brightness. I always recommend keeping auto brightness on, as does Apple. And the reason for this is even though it's on, you can customize the brightness. You can bring it down, you can bring it up, and it will stay for the time being, and then it will adjust again. There are ambient light sensors in the top where the notch is that regulate brightness based on the ambient light around you. And so you want to make sure that's on. So under accessibility in your settings, go to display and text size, and then go down and turn on auto brightness. Now I turn it off for videos because it adjusts brightness based on the video and then messes up the exposure. But when I'm not recording videos, I always have auto brightness on. And then during the day, I just move it up and down. If it's hard to see outside, I'll turn the brightness up. If I'm inside and it's too bright at night, I'll just bring it down and leave it there until I'm done with it. Then it will adjust on its own to give you the optimal battery usage and keep your battery going for a long time. That goes along with locking the phone. If you go under display and brightness under your settings and to auto lock, again, I have this set to never because of the video, but I typically leave this at 30 seconds so that it shuts off the screen when it's not in use to save the most amount of power available. So 30 seconds, it will dim the display and then shut off. You can set this based on what you need, but I typically leave it on 30 seconds just to save power overall. It's something I generally recommend to most people. Now, another thing that uses a lot of power is location services. Activating the GPS antenna within the iPhone uses a lot of power. It's gathering information from satellites to triangulate where it is and in turn give you precise location. And you can see that with the little arrow here. Now, again, that's shown in the battery settings as well. And under battery, you can see here, if something is using your power, it will show you here. So you could see something using a lot of power based on location, but also you can customize this individually. So in your settings, if you go down to privacy, under privacy is location settings or services. Now, I don't typically recommend you turn this off altogether because certain apps need your location. For example, that would be Apple Maps or Google Maps. However, you can customize this based on what you need from that app. So if you're using Google Maps or Apple Maps, I have it turned on to while using the app or widgets. So I need the location to be activated when I'm using Google Maps or Apple Maps, so I have it turned on. You could change it to while using the app and also precise location. If you turn this off and you just want the app to have a general location, maybe you want nearby stores to kind of know the area you're in, but you don't need to give them a precise location. It can use your Wi-Fi to locate you rather than your GPS and give a general idea, saving you some power. So this can be customized individually. And again, I don't recommend turning it off altogether, as applications such as Find My will need to use your location or use other location to find other people. So the same is true of Apple Store. I use the Apple Store app, but I only need this to be active while I'm using the application. That's really crucial for me, or you could tell it to ask next time and don't use it in the meantime. Also, down at the very bottom, you'll see system services. And a lot of people ask me, should I turn these off? You could turn these off if you don't want to use some of them, but these are generally system services that are required for the OS to function properly. So I don't typically turn these off. You can do that, of course, but you'll see for cell network search, you would probably want locations so that it knows which towers to connect to more efficiently. And again, emergency calls and SOS. That would be crucial to locating you if you were in an emergency. So I typically tell people to leave these alone for the most part. Normally, I will not change those at all, and you really shouldn't be bothered too much with battery from that. Now, another thing that saves power is Wi-Fi. And some people are saying, should I turn off Wi-Fi? Well, if Wi-Fi is available and you're connected to a Wi-Fi network, you'll save the most amount of power being connected to a Wi-Fi network as compared to cellular. Think of it as in the sense of Wi-Fi is nearby, cellular might be a tower that's a mile away, and it needs to communicate and push more power to communicate that further distance. So Wi-Fi is always better as far as power. Now, if you're in an area where you know you have no Wi-Fi whatsoever, then you can disable Wi-Fi and it will save you power. Otherwise, if you have Wi-Fi available, you definitely want to use that. Bluetooth is the same thing. Bluetooth is very low power, and it's very debatable whether or not you should turn that off. I typically leave Bluetooth on all the time because Bluetooth in general is one of the lowest power versions of wireless communication. So I typically leave that on, but if you don't use Bluetooth, you don't use headphones or anything like that, you don't use AirDrop or handoff, then certainly you could turn this off and it might save you a little bit of power. But I normally don't turn that off because I use AirPods and other things that use Bluetooth regularly. Now, if you're in an area with no cell coverage, then you'll definitely save a lot of power just by turning on airplane mode. Airplane mode will save the most amount of power since it shuts off all of your wireless antennas and saves a ton of power. You would find that your phone lasts many days usually if you turn that off as opposed to leaving it on. However, you want those communications to use most of your apps. So unless you're in an area where you have zero communication, then I wouldn't recommend turning that on. Or of course, if you're in an airplane, then use that. Otherwise, you don't really want to turn that off. But if you are in the middle of a field somewhere, maybe you're out hunting, or maybe you're just going on an adventure and camping, you could turn that on and you'll save a lot of power. Now, another thing that saves power is your mail settings. Mail will actually fetch mail and pull mail in based on the duration you set. You can have this set to push, which will push mail as it comes into the server, then it will push to your phone, or you can have it fetch mail and grab that from the server one by one as they come in as well. If you turn that off altogether, that will save you more power, but if you need to get email regularly, you want to leave those on. And if you go into your settings again and go to Mail, under Mail, you'll see your account. Go into your accounts, and under your accounts, maybe we'll go to Fetch New Data, and you'll see it set to Push. Under Push, we have different options. So we can turn off Push altogether, although that's fairly low power depending on who you're using. I typically use iCloud for that, and then you'll see Fetch for everything else. But I have it fetch mail every 15 minutes. You can switch this to manually, so meaning it will not check for mail until you go into the Mail application. That will save you the most power. Of course, if you're not using Apple's Mail application, you could just turn this off altogether or delete the Mail app and you would save power there and then configure your other Mail app to save power. But if you want to save the most amount of power, flip this to manual, turn off Push, and you'll save the most amount of power overall. I typically use email all the time, so I leave those on, but definitely configure those based on your usage. Now, also many have asked me, should I close my applications or why don't I close my applications? And typically I don't close applications unless they're a map application that's using my location in the background. So normally leaving an application open will suspend it in the background and it typically doesn't do anything. However, if it is causing a problem and you see that in battery, swipe it off the screen and it may save some power. However, it's not necessary to go in swiping these off the screen all the time. And there's also an argument that says it will use more power by doing that since it will have to fully reload the app instead of unsuspending it. So I typically leave everything open, and this goes back quite a ways. So I leave all of that open typically and have no issues. You generally won't see it using battery, but if you do, change it and swipe it off the screen and see if it makes a difference. Typically it won't, but sometimes it will. Now, when it comes to low power mode, you can always use that to extend your battery to get you home until you can charge, or to a place of work, or basically to a charger anywhere. However, I recommend against using low power mode regularly, and there's multiple reasons for this. Low power mode is great, but when you're at a full battery capacity, it's not really necessary because you're actually reducing the performance of your phone. Low power power mode, according to Apple, not only reduces performance, but reduces display brightness, optimizes device performance, which means lowers the performance, and minimizes system animations. Apps including Mail will not download content in the background, and features like AirDrop, iCloud Sync, and continuity will be disabled. And you can see how my screen just dimmed, and that's because it switched on the feature to make sure my phone locks at every 30 seconds or so. So typically I don't recommend turning that on unless you can't get to a charger in quite some time. You're going to reduce the experience of your phone overall, and so I normally don't recommend that. Now, as far as things that are not Apple recommended, there's a bunch of things other people have said in videos, such as widgets and things like that using battery. So I wanted to go over those briefly as well. And what I mean by that is widgets will actually get information every so often. If you're not using widgets, in theory, you'll use less battery. But it really depends on the widget. With this widget here, the weather app, it's going to refresh every so often and then change. You'll see that when I was on the widget, it showed 84 degrees Fahrenheit. When I went into it, it was 85. It had not refreshed the entire time I was looking at it. So Apple has set the refresh time of these widgets to maybe every 15 minutes. We don't really know, but the application developer does have the option to change that. Now, if it's something that's going to check all of the time, then I might remove widgets. But the more widgets you have, the more information it's going to pull down. And in theory, the more power you're going to use. So I would maybe reduce the amount of widgets if you're seeing high amounts of battery usage, but generally Apple says not to worry about it. Also, there's a feature called sound recognition that can, in theory, use a little bit of power, but it's not very much. Under sound recognition, that's an accessibility feature where it recognizes voices and things in the background to let you know, and you'll see sound recognition here is on. And sound recognition will recognize different sounds, like I said, and you'll see here's sounds it can recognize. Different types of alarms, animals, household appliances, car horns, babies crying, and more. This is a great accessibility feature if you're hard of hearing or deaf, and this will allow you to know on your screen if something is making a noise. However, if you don't use these things, I would recommend turning it off, as it is using a little bit of power with the microphone, but it's very little. In fact, I had that turned on and didn't even know it because it wasn't using hardly any power. So I don't generally recommend that. And also Siri, where you say the word "hey" in front of it, I typically don't turn that off unless you don't use that feature. That is designed to work very low power within the chipset, and it uses hardly any battery whatsoever. If you don't use it, well, then generally you can turn it off. But normally I would leave it turned on because it's not using hardly any power whatsoever. Things that are not worth turning off are Siri suggestions, vibration from the vibration motor, also animated cover art, motion in general, and content blockers to stop ads from loading, and back tap. Those things use such low power that I don't generally recommend turning them off. Apple doesn't recommend it, so I don't recommend it as well, and I've seen zero difference when using the phone based on when those features are off and based on when they're on. So those are all of the different things I would recommend with iOS 15. It's fairly optimized for battery, but again, use the battery tool here, or the battery settings, to actually optimize what's using power. If Instagram is using background activity, turn off background activity or close the application. If it's not using anything, you'll see Twitter tends to use a lot of background activity for some reason for me, and so I need to close it often. Otherwise, optimize it based on what you see here. Some things, of course, if you're just using them, they're just going to use power, like FaceTime. Now, aside from all the tips I've mentioned here, there's also a battery manager shortcut that I wanted to link for you in the description below. If you tap on the shortcut, it will ask you what you would like to do. So it says many options for your battery packed into just one shortcut. What would you like to do? Activate, deactivate, fast charge, or go into ultra low power to save the most amount of battery. If you tap on ultra low power, give it just a moment, and it says, do you want to run it? We'll allow it once. And you'll see that the screen instantly dimmed, and I can barely see it. So it turned on a bunch of different things based off the battery manager. And so the battery manager will dim the screen and do a lot of different things. So I'll link that in the description if you'd like to use it. I'm not someone that changes a whole lot of these things regularly. You'll see it turned on low power mode and much more. So I'll link that in the description for you if you want to save the most amount of power possible. So that's it as far as the battery tips. Of course, as far as charging goes, a lot of people ask me how I charge. And typically I do two different things. When I'm in a car, I wirelessly charge my phone. When I'm at home, I put it on the charger at night, fast charging it. I just leave it and let the phone handle it itself. From year to year, I've found that I lose about 5 to 7% or so of my battery percentage or battery health overall, and Apple says 80% after 2 years is completely normal. So I'm still within spec. I use it every day and then put it on the charger at night. You can choose to keep it between 20 and 80%, but I find that trying to manage that yourself, not only is it tedious, but it's something that might save you 3% battery. And to replace a battery in an iPhone is fairly inexpensive these days, and so I would recommend just doing that. If you're going to keep your phone maybe 3 or 5 years, well, then maybe you could do that. But I, again, don't really recommend that, as I would say just enjoy and use your phone and don't worry about it. Try and keep the phone fairly cool, but not too cold that it's frozen either. Other than that, just enjoy using the phone overall. Now, if these tips were a big help to you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And also, what do you do to charge your phone? I typically don't worry about it too much because I just want to enjoy using the phone. But let me know what you do in the comments below. If you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, though, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. And of course, I'll link the Anker Nano Pro there as well if you'd like to try that out for yourself. If you haven't subscribed already, though, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.